Right, there we go. All right. Well, thanks very much, Jacob. Welcome to the panel. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm James Taylor. I'm founder and executive partner of Blue Polaris. Used to be known as Decision Management Solutions. And like many of my fellow panelists, I've been working in decisioning a really long time, 25 years or so. Published a few books on decisioning and decision modeling. And again, like several of them, a co-submitter, an original co-submitter and committee member for the decision model and notation standard. And I'm joined by some great folks here. I'm going to go through the introductions of which century, very funny, Carol Ann. So yes, since the last century, yes, indeed, since the last millennium, I've been working in decisioning, just like everybody else on this call. I'm going to go through alphabetical order for the folks who are here, and then I'll give you a quick summary of the folks we're hoping to get who haven't made it yet. So first up, Alan Fish. Alan's Senior Director of Business Enablement for the FICO platform, invented decision requirements diagrams and laid that out in his book, Knowledge Automation. He's the editor, co-author, and co-chair of the DMN specification at the moment. Long career in decisioning, PhD in neural networks, and focused currently on letting business owners specify the business intent of their decisioning solutions and then using AI agents to monitor them and propose improvements. So welcome, Alan. Next up, Gary. Gary is the founder of Hallmark AI Consulting, helps regulated and data-sensitive organizations evaluate, design, and pilot private verifiable AI systems. MIT-trained software architect, decades of experience at IBM Research and Oracle. Another co-submitter and co-author of the DMN standard, co-chaired the DMN committee for many years, pretty much invented DMN's field expression language. Current work focused on controlled infrastructure, deterministic decisioning, and evidence-based AI. Right, next up is Carlos Serrano Morales. Carlos spent much of his career in AI analytics, decision management, business rules, worked in Europe, joined Neuron Data, worked on Nexpert, early expert system, and then Blaze Advisor from really the earliest days of business rules, as Caroline pointed out many, many years ago, and responsible for all the decision management technologies at FICO, and then co-founded Spark and Logic. He's responsible for Smarts, their decision management platform. We're hoping to be joined also by Adam Giger, who is the co-founder of BitBros, and by Guillaume Moline, who is the decision chief architect at IBM. They only get short intros because they didn't show up on time. So with that, the way we normally do this is I have some questions that I'm going to sort of ask the team here and get us started, but I'm much more interested in questions from the audience. So if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Obviously, you can be like Paul and Caroline and put snarky comments in the chat too. But you know, just because they've also been working in this space as long as we have, they're also old and gray-haired. But the rest of us are going to take questions. So I have a few. I'll ask those first. We'll go around, and then hopefully we'll get some questions from the audience. All right. So first up, we'll start with I see you in order: Gary, Carlos, and then Alan. But don't ask me why. So I'm going to start in that order. So get Gary first, then Carlos, then Alan, and then we'll go backwards for the second question. So first question. So there's a lot of talking about AI. And so one of the questions really is, where should AI sort of, if you like, stop and a formal decision model begin, right? How do we draw the boundaries between what you might consider sort of an AI component? Where does it add the most value? And then which bits should we still be thinking in terms of formal decision models? So Gary, this sounds like it's where you're doing your research. So this seems like right up your alley to get started.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, the way I like to think about it is, use AI where the world is ambiguous. Lots of language, lots of non-digital inputs, basically, right? Human-generated inputs, or you need to interface with the human to tell them what the decision is and why. But use a formal model for as much else as you can, right? Especially where so AI, when the world is ambiguous, formal models where you don't want any ambiguity in your enterprise, right? I mean, AI is good at reading documents and conversations and things like that, right? But it's really kind of hard to improve, I think, on like a decision table for clarity and determinism, right? And that's, I guess, what is one way to think of it might be to use AI to shrink the unknown, but don't let it generate the unknown.
Don't let it make the problem worse. Right. Okay.
Right. Right.
Yeah. All right. About you, Carlos, anything you want to sort of add or argue with Gary about? Yeah.
No, I'm not going to argue. I think the question has many possible answers depending on the dimension you take. I mean, from an ethical perspective, I certainly don't want an AI as of today for XYZ, for reasons that we can get into later. But I wouldn't want an AI to make a final decision on things that affect people's lives, people's livelihoods, people's reputation, and things like that. There is a whole problem with incorporating AI into decisions that are automated, which is the chain of responsibility. At the end of the day, who's responsible? And that is going to be an area where there will be a lot of battles, a lot of legal things, etc. From a pure business, if you forget the ethical part, so from the ethical part, I would say you really need to
have channeling Facebook or something.
Yeah, you need to, the part of the decision that will impact people's lives and company. You do need to have things that are verifiable, really verifiable. And we can get into what that means, but which AI today, I would say, really cannot do. From a business standpoint, it's the same thing. As you make a wrong decision and somebody dies or somebody loses their house. Well, who's responsible today? As AI stands and as AI vendors stand, the AI vendor or the person delivering the service is still responsible because AI is not a person. So you will hear a lot of talk from the AI vendors trying to position their AI as actually people. And that, for me, the reason they're doing that is that they want to give them personhood so that they can later on say, oh, it wasn't us. We gave them the parameters, but this thing, because they can do that with people today. Today, a corporation, if somebody goes outside the boundaries of their responsibility in an answer that they do give to a customer, they are liable, but not the company. You cannot say that today with AI, but they're trying very hard. So this, from a business perspective, things that need to be repeatable, that cannot be reversed easily, that impact, we want those things to be crisp. Now, from a technical standpoint, I 100% agree with Gary. The AI is absolutely brilliant at dealing with fuzzy information, fuzzy documents, converting fuzzy to structured, extracting feelings, out of that stuff. So basically, as an input to something crisp, which will be your decision, and they're also brilliant at explaining. So whenever you need to give an explanation in textual form to your customer, case management, it's a tool that you would use. So I would say anything that needs to be repeatable, that needs to be verifiable, and that needs to be debuggable, you probably want to form a model. Right. For all the fuzzy things and all the exploratory phases, AI is brilliant.
All right, Alan, anything you want to add to this stir the pot here as your research into this?
I think Gary's not bad or nail right on the head actually with his distinction there between use of AI and deterministic decisioning. Can't add anything to that really. I think Carlos is right about the worries about responsibilities. I do worry about the hammer and nail scenario that if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and I do worry that people are using AI agents far too widely or thinking they could, and we know that deterministic decisioning is much easier to justify in any regulated domain than anything fuzzy. And mustn't forget this. We've optimized our deterministic decisioning over decades to be really, really efficient.
Yeah.
Right. And so it is ridiculously cheaper computationally than AI. Why would you use AI to make a decision that can be done with a decision table? I think we have to. It's not just a question of elegance. We've got to have some environmental awareness here and think about the impact of data centers and so on for AI. We shouldn't be overusing AI when deterministic decisioning is adequate. So I would turn your question around, James. I say, where should decision models stop and where should we start using AI? Right? We also
Yeah,
use it
yeah.
around the edges where deterministic AI isn't enough.
Yeah, no, it's one of those classic bad news, good news things, right? The bad news is companies think they can use AI agents for more or less anything. And the good news is they, of course, can't get these damn things into production anyway. So for the moment, at least, their exposure is relatively manageable because, they're all still in pilots and sandboxes. So as we learned from some of our AI vendors, sandboxes may not be as sandboxy as they like to think they are. So we may have to revisit that.
More sand than box.
Exactly right. So while I'm on the with you, Alan, let's go back the other way. So related to that, so how much decision authority do we want to delegate to these things? How do we inject human insight into these things? And particularly, as Carlos pointed out, when we're trying to make a real-time decision, right? When we're trying to decide you're in a store, you're getting instant credit or something, and there's some role for AI that's well defined in this. How do we inject human oversight into that, given we're trying to make a decision in milliseconds?
Right. So I think Carlos has it right here. We can never delegate responsibility to an AI or to any automation. Actually, the responsibility for our decisions will always remain with humans or with human organizations like enterprises. And so if you are using deterministic decisioning, humans authorize the decision logic to be used, and humans handle any cases which aren't covered by the logic.
Right.
When we introduce learning or gradual improvements to our systems via simulation and optimization and so on, humans specify the business intent for those improvements, and humans have to authorize all the changes to the decision logic. So AI makes decisioning more sophisticated, basically. It doesn't remove responsibility from the people who deploy and manage it. And also it's more opaque and it's more unpredictable. So companies have to make a call on how much liability they're prepared to accept. I think that's what's going to inform the choice of where human oversight is used.
Yeah, though of course, as we know from that great book, Noise, human decision making varies a lot more than companies think it does.
Yeah.
Right? They think their underwriters all price things in a certain range of prices, and when they actually analyze it, they discover that they're wildly different from each other. So there's already a lot more human variation, I think, than people realize. So I think it's going to force some interesting discussions. Carlos, what about you? How would you, you made some great points about it. So how would you see the human oversight playing in like a real-time decisioning environment, which is using AI?
Well, I mean, define real time. I mean, as an intervention. Sorry, so if you're in a fraud case and you're actually, running your credit card, the AI is not going to be involved, I don't think, in any time soon because of all the performance and cost issues. It's not going to be involved in the immediate classification of this is fraudulent or not potentially. So things that would have been created with AI may, but not AI itself as in an inference. Where they would be involved is an intervention. So basically somebody calling and saying, well, you are there, you know what's going on. And they may be involved in the communication. But again, the key problem is that responsibility thing at the end of the day. So the AI will recommend, will provide call scripts, will guide maybe the call agent in the interaction or the chatbot during the interaction. But decisions, ultimate decisions, would be with a human oversight, either because it was already translated into something verifiable, for the real time, or a human would be in the loop. There is also the legal aspect. I mean, the EU, this EU AI Act, Alan, I'm sure you know. Brexit. Sorry, forget. You may not know. But you should know. So essentially, you're supposed to watermark everything. But I do think that that's going to go forward in other dimensions. When you're going to make a decision, you will probably have to disclose where the AI intervened and under which form. And I think you already have to in certain legislations, like in California. So, and that's actually quite a challenge, because how do you actually do that? That doesn't seem very simple today. But the long answer, that's a long answer to your question. At the end of the day, I do think that, again, any decision that has impact, that's not reversible simply, has impact, we'll have to, the human will either be involved in the verification and the validation of the conversion to a concrete model, if you want, or will be involved in the loop as a human in the loop rather than just as a monitoring thing. That would be my opinion.
Right. No, it's interesting because there's a law here in California about like medical claims decisions, and it says you've got to have a doctor has to make the decision. And so one of the things that's not clear in the legislation is if I have a doctor and that doctor reviews a decision model and says this decision model is a perfectly medically valid way to make this decision, and then that's used to decline a claim, is that okay? And it probably is, because that doctor can be brought into court, right, in a way that you can't, as you say, bring an AI into court. So it's an interesting area. Gary, what about you? About decision authority in these circumstances? Yeah.
Oh, geez. Yeah. I mean, you can delegate authority, I guess, but as we're saying, you can't really delegate responsibility or accountability unless you start giving the AIs job titles.
Yeah.
Right?
And they have to understand.
Yeah, it's like Carlos was getting at, right? I mean, the company is responsible, right? Even if their employee makes a bad decision, but it doesn't always work out that way, right? It could just be scapegoating. I mean, if you read your employment contract, it may say that, you could be held individually liable, right?
Yep.
For certain bad decisions that you make as part of your job, which is a little bit, facetious, I guess, right? I mean, but, who knows, right? I mean, the legal landscape, as we're saying, changes fairly rapidly, and people are very, they've got their panties in a wad, as they say, about, AI and losing jobs and the environment and all of this. So, it's moving very quick. I mean, even the leaders of the movement wanted to slow down. So it's an interesting time. And putting a human in the loop isn't necessarily going to solve the problem. Right. I mean, they may not have time.
Someone to fire, though.
until the last one is gone, right?
Yeah, exactly. Fair, yeah.
If you lack the time, if you're not given the appropriate evidence to do the review, right, or the authority to change the result, we can just have a bunch of AI says this, rubber stamping theater, must be right, must be right, must be right.
Yes to all.
I mean, and I've been using the coding agents for a long time, and I used to take the time to read the code that it generated, Now it's like, it's probably right, it passed the test,
Yes. Yeah, right. But it's that.
And did you look at the test? Well, no, I'm sure they're right.
No, not really. I generated them with a different AI. Exactly. Yeah. So one more question.
Gary, before, Gary brought a very good point there too. It's true that actually the models that we create for actual models, are the decision models, but beyond decision models, predictive models. They may also have bias. They may also incorporate essentially, but to Alan's point earlier, it's been decades of work to identify that. I mean, so there are tools that are proven that do help identify that. I think,
and regulations written specifically for those scenarios.
Exactly. So I think, and they are accessible to anybody who's building these systems. We're not there yet with AI. I think that's the key challenge. We're not in a position where we can say, oh, yeah, this is fair. I mean, we can ask.
We're still working that way. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, Carlos, I'm going to ask you first one more question, then I'll take some from the chat here because we've got some good questions coming in. So, quick answer. A lot of the decision modeling work and rules work we've done historically has been very focused on explainability. How do we make sure something's explainable? Yeah, and you made the point that AI is really good at explaining things in natural language. So is explainability still as important as it used to be in decision models, or are we going to rely on LLMs to do the explaining better?
All right, so let me qualify what I said. So first, they're very good at giving you an explanation, okay? So that's a very different thing as explaining the thing. They're very good at giving you an explanation. I think the explainability challenge is actually much bigger, because first, for two dimensions. One, the number of places where we have automation is growing, and the automation is also growing. The pace of automation is also growing. We're putting tools now. Anybody can go and use Claude and start creating essentially, I'm not going to say a rules engine, but a decision implementation that they can implement. Yep. I need this decision to be done. Boom, here's a bunch of constraints I want you to do. Give me a decision. Here's the code. I deploy. And as Gary was saying, the older you get, and I see questions in there, the older you get at doing that, the more you trust the system and your attention goes down. And that's actually very bad, is because the better these tools come, the most sophisticated the errors they make. So the amount, and I think somebody made the point earlier, the uncanny valley. That's exactly what we've seen. Essentially, we've seen it in rules as well as in development. So I do think the stakes are going higher. Reasoning, the models, the reasoning models that the LLM, where they do and give you an explanation of what they've done. We've had customers report to us that they started lying. So that basically that the explanation that they give on how they reached the result was actually not how they reached the result. And that they could get the system to basically change the description of the way they reach the conclusion without changing the conclusion by basically interacting with it. So that creates a problem of trust. That creates, is the explanation that the system is giving me on the way it proceeded actually the way it proceeded? It may not be. So there is a lot of
here's a plausible explanation for what I might have done.
Exactly. So there is a lot of trust that needs to be built and tools that need to be created for the explanations coming purely out of the AI to be valid. So the emphasis on making sure that the models that are created at the core of your system, not on the edges where you're dealing with fuzzy data and converting it to strict data or generating explanations, if you want. The core of the system needs to be explainable, and that's another reason why formal decision models and formal AI with all the AI analytics with the proven methods that we have today are going to stay in for a while.
Okay, Gary, Alan, anything you want to add to that? I've got a bunch of great questions in the chat, so I want to get to some of the chat questions. So
yeah. I mean, I think you don't want to just have this one God model, ask it a question and then have it give you the proof of why it's right, all the resources or the citations, the sources that it used, because anything it says is very fluid and very believable, right? And who's to say that its explanation isn't just yet another, very nice BS argument, that just effectively is agreeing with you, right? But it sounds really, really nice. And, oh yeah, well, that's very, very good. You need, an orchestration, I think, of some LLMs and some deterministic agents that kind of check on each other, right? And specifically to the point of explainability, you need to capture, all the artifacts and the results of the decision in some sort of, database or log structure, and then ask the LLM to verbalize that as the explanation. It'll still be very fluent and very nice, but it might actually be correct.
Yes. Yeah, no, we've had this issue already where we're explaining decision outcomes and you have to really knock it back so that it doesn't take what it knows about a general purpose topic and include that in the explanation, right? So Alan, and about you, last comments on this?
Yeah. I just want to slightly undercut the preceding, just saying that explainability isn't just about a trace. Right, it's about answering any questions the user or the customer might have about a decision that's been made about them, the justification for a decision, or counterfactual ideas, or whatever. So, and this isn't a trace. This is a free language-based interaction with some decision-making structure, and this is what LLMs do really, really well. But I agree with Gary that the ideal combination is LLMs to to produce the explanation based on a deterministic model and the results of that model's execution.
Right. Okay. All right. So let's get to some of the audience questions, because some of these are quite good. So this one should be, I think you can hopefully will give me relatively quick answers. So obviously there's a long-term concern here that developers are, like Gary, increasingly using these code harnesses and everything else. And do we worry this is going to reduce their understanding of the technology? And I guess as a sort of consequence of that, as someone who's worked in the decisioning space a long time, make it so they're not really as aware of the value proposition of some of these things, right? That they lose that understanding of the underlying technology, and they're just letting the code, they're just working with the AI tools. So do we think this is going to undermine developers' ability to make good choices about what kind of considerations they need to make when they're building a system?
So, yeah.
No.
You wanted a short answer, you got it. But beyond that, I think even at the product management, so you start at the definition level. So there's one camp that says, the job of software guys is secure because customers are unable to articulate what they really want. So whatever they'll tell the LLM is not going to produce what they want. So that may be true or may not be true. But what I worry about is the loss of critical thinking, is the fact that you get so used to having the system produce something that you stop challenging it. And it's as important as you are refining requirements, so basically doing modeling, if you want to translate in those terms, as it is when you're writing code. That's what I worry about, and I worry about that, for the next generations. Not just we are at the end of our careers. I'm talking about
exactly.
The young people.
We're gonna ride off into the sunset pretty soon here, right? Exactly. So Gary, Alan, does this worry you as much as it worries Carlos and worries me?
No, it doesn't worry me. I think actually, I mean, do we worry about the fact we don't have to worry about machine code anymore?
No, that's true.
The idea of bringing in these higher levels of software is that we can delegate the optimization and validation and so on of code to the operating system.
But there is a difference in this case. The thing is producing at a speed you cannot follow, which wasn't the case with assembly necessarily. But it's different in the sense that it's your human. It's up to now. It's my impression. Up to now, we were in processes where you could challenge things. It was easy to challenge. And the environments were such and the tools were such that you were invited, or at least you were not prevented from challenging. I'm now dealing with a system which agrees with me 99% of the time when I say, you're stupid, you should have done this other thing. Oh, yeah.
I should have totally done that. Yeah.
That basically lowers it basically lowers your, it's just an impression. But I do think the fact that the question was asked is proof that
I suppose it depends what you mean by AI code gets better. And what I had assumed was that we have AI-based tools that help people define decision-making clearly in form that they can actually check. So AI assistance in creating decision models, for example, is something to be welcomed. Oh, yeah. And so long as we can use those tools to guarantee the correctness and the good structure of those models, I see no problem in taking a set of documents, creating a decision model from them, and allowing users to inspect those and check them.
Yeah, but where I see the problem is that whether the document is going to be the right one. It's whether I've put enough energy, because the document in question is going to be produced by Claude too. It's a reality. That's what we see. And exactly, we didn't ask that question, but it's one of the challenges that we see in services, but when we're basically helping customers build things, is that suddenly we're starting to see AI-generated requirements documents appear left and right. And those documents, because they're generated by things that don't naturally challenge you, they are incomplete. You may validate something that in fact doesn't reflect reality. So that's where I worry about. I worry about things earlier than the actual coding.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, right? Because we get a lot of these requirements documents, right? And then one of the reasons we like building decision models is precisely that, right? That it forces a degree of challenge. Well, this is what's implied by your thing, and it's inconsistent with this other thing. Are you sure that's what you meant, and everything else, right? And so it is a little bit more worrying. I mean, obviously we can generate these documents. We do a lot of work on this stuff. It's not just LLMs, it's other models for different parts of the process and so on. These very complex tooling to develop decision models from whatever you've got. But it is harder to challenge it. That's for sure. Gary, anything you want to add? Yeah.
Wait, what was the question? Does AI make you stupid?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah. I mean, in particular, does it shallow your understanding of the technology you're working with, and does that carry risks?
I mean, I'm worried just more about it making you stupid. I mean, there are already
just in general,
there are already reports of college students can't write an essay.
Right.
Have no idea how to even start. Didn't get the memo that you tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and you tell them what you told them, kind of thing, right? And how does that affect code? Well, yeah, I think you should use AI to write code. I think that's just a great application, probably the killer application of generative AI. One of the reasons is because it's got such a tight feedback loop. I mean, generate random keyboard walks. Well, it's not going to compile, right? So it's just not going to work. And they're pretty good about the test cases. The problem is that they're working at these low levels of artifacts, right? Code and test cases. And so my experience has been when you start to get a bigger system, they start to fail. Maybe it's the context rot. That's partly it. And one of the reasons they're phenomenally expensive for tokens, every time you ask it a question, it essentially has to go and read the whole code base.
Right.
Or not, right? And then make a big mistake. And so what I found is that just, fairly clear writing, you don't even have to do it yourself. You can use the LLM, but then you need to go and read that very carefully and rewrite it very carefully and say, this is my gold spec, and I actually do this in my practice is I say, this you may not change, right? You can change the code, you can change the other sort of spin-off documents, but this is my data model. I don't want you changing this. Now, if you find something wrong with it, it's okay to propose, that, hey, I know you're not going to like to hear this, but we might need to go and change this data model because it's going to make all these other problems go away. Yeah, that's fair, but you can't do it without having that discussion first.
Right.
But I worry about the vibe coding and just go in and say, make me an app that does this or that, right? And it's not going to be very extensive. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it'll, back to your point of makes a great demo, right? But
right.
3 years later, we started in production. It might not have been the best idea.
So I'm going to lead this one straight into a question that James about.
Actually, James, can I just
go ahead? Yeah.
Let's come back on. I've just reread the question.
Right.
And it says, will the role of the decision engine platform disappear? Not engineer.
Oh no, that's a different one.
Itself.
That's a different question. There's another question on that one. Yes.
That's the first one.
No. From
will the role of the decision engine
concerns for future developers, right? There's a lot of questions in here. So
yeah. And the first one is, as AI code gen gets better, will the role of the decision engine disappear? I think
that's several down. So that's Paul Vincent's
first
one.
That's number one.
I got 3 or 4 earlier. So
are we looking at the same list? I'm looking at number one.
But you're looking at the first question that Paul asked. Right. That's Paul's first question, not the first question. So I will get to Paul's
I
first
see.
question.
My apologies. Right. Okay.
So anyway, I'm going to lead straight into Jacob's because it seems tied to the one we just answered. So Jacob asked, how optimistic are we about the automatic generation of working decision models from English language requirements? And I think we're all working on this, right? So, we get pretty good at these things, right? There's lots of tools. You're not just using LLMs. There's lots of ways to do this, and they're getting pretty good. So you can certainly go straight from regulations and requirement stocks. We certainly are, to reviewable decision models. I think we're all a little bit concerned that that's not as readily challenged as the process of building a decision model by hand, but it's certainly doable. But I think the more interesting question that he asked at the end here is, how optimistic are we about maintaining these models? Do we think we're going to generate them and then tell people, now you got to maintain the model? Or are we going to let them keep maintaining these documents and keep updating the model? Yeah, so I'm curious how you see, I think we're all pretty bullish on generating decision models from text, from documents, from requirements. But then what? How do you see the maintenance of all this, guys? So Gary, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I would just continue on my previous rant, I think, which is, you know, I mean, in code, right, there's a lot of redundancy, right? And what's bad is if it's not checkable, right? So, you know, surely there's some redundancy with the implementation and the specification, right? And these can drift, and that's a problem. I found that AI is brilliant, you know, about helping with that, right? I just always tell it, you know, put it in my, you know, agents.md, you know, oh, by the way, you know, if you made some changes to the code, did you correct the documentation, right? You know, obviously you can't correct.
Gary, you're totally right. I forgot to do that. So
you can't correct the gold documentation, right? But you can correct the other one. And I think that the, you know, I mean, in the sense that you're generating, maybe you generated the code from the specification, maybe you didn't. But, you know, I think the same thing would happen with decision models, right? And you would probably want to give similar advice, like, you know, because, you know, if you just gave it something kind of half thought out, you know, keep these in sync, well, you know, it could just go and, you know, implement whatever code it wanted and change the pros of the decision, right, to make it agree with that. And you probably want to say, you know, that's not what I want you to do. You know, I want you to change the implementation to match the specification. But if you notice that the specification is largely inconsistent, then please let's have a discussion about that. Don't silently fix it. Let's have a discussion about that. And, you know, now, you know, the smaller models aren't very good about following instruction, but, you know, the current frontier models, I think, can do that. And I don't think I would be worried about that. In fact, you know, I've seen that they do a better job of actually editing, you know, a big code base in place than they do about generating it from a specification in the first place. Right? It's just something about how they work. It gives them the extra context, so they're less likely to just jump off into the weeds. So yeah, I don't think that the model of, you know, do something here, push the button, and have it generate another artifact over there, and then having to manually keep those in sync. I think AI solves that problem pretty well.
Carlos, Alan, anything you want to add? What's your or disagree? I mean, obviously you can yell at Gary and disagree with him. That's also fair.
I'll never yell at Gary. Well, not in the same room anyway.
Yeah, right.
But I do think
there's no beer.
The idea of a one pass approach to taking documents and creating a decision service from them is ridiculous.
Yeah,
largely because of the issues you've raised about maintenance, and also I think we have a cluster of problems that are rather like predictive analytics, where you get overfitting or underfitting to a particular set of data that happen to be in your documents. So I think we need to imagine a situation where there's an intermediate stage which has been called the specification, but I think actually should be based on formal models.
Yep.
And that there's it would involve people actually talking about what has been generated in the specification and whether it really meets their needs, and it's that specification that would be maintained over time, while you generate automatically the actual code that executes the decision.
Okay, Carlos, what are you?
I think these things are brilliant for that. But it's essentially everything in the what if, you know, and I want to change this. I would like to change this, you know, tell me what the consequences would be, which is not just make the change and show me, but tell me what the consequences would be, run all these tests and tell me what the delta would be, etc. All that very iterative process where the input to the change may be documents that update, it may be ideas that I have, it may be, you know, in the course of a conversation with somebody, having the ability to interact with the system in very fluid ways, and that's what the English language gives you. As an interface, if you want, as opposed to having to build, you know, a bunch of GUIs to do all that. What if now I can just have the LLM basically call the right tools essentially to do that. So I do see a lot of progress. I'm very optimistic, very, very optimistic about that. What I'm less optimistic about is people using the English language the proper way. And I shouldn't be saying this, but there is ambiguity in any language, like which is not a formal language, for a particular purpose. There's always ambiguity and things like that. So the fact that, so I do believe that the maintenance of models is a maintenance of model that includes everything related to testing in there, and the what if scenarios and access to data to verify that you're being correct, that you haven't introduced regression and all that kind of stuff. I believe that I'm very, very optimistic about that.
All right. So, so the next question is about like hybrid systems, right? So I think we've all seen, I suspect we've all seen, certainly I have, people who are explicitly thinking about how they combine machine learning, AI, decision models, explicit rules into hybrid systems. There's a thread of people who've been working on this a while. But the question here that another James asks is, now people have seen these leaks, right, where these models get out and attack things and do things they're not supposed to do and all the rest of it because they're trying to meet their goals. Have you seen that behavior is making more people interested in this sort of use of deterministic alongside AI? Or is it still basically the same people who've got it all along? Has the sort of, the ongoing discussion of these models misbehaving prompted more people to dial it back and say, okay, I'm not going to just use AI, I'm going to start thinking about a hybrid approach? Or is it still just the people like us who've been around a long time, have gray hair and paranoid?
Or none.
So, what?
I said, or no hair at all, James.
Oh, no, indeed, no hair at all, right? I mean, you don't really care because you've already moved to a remote island, so you're already safe from the AI apocalypse, right? So, no, anyway, seriously, I mean, do we see the current round of behavior with AI models making it more interesting for people, or are people still just like, no, la, 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 I'll be fine, Gary, you do a lot of work in this space. What do are you noticing an increase in interest?
I mean,
no, obviously not.
I think it's turning political, I think, right?
Okay.
And so, when that happens, who knows what's going to happen, right? I mean, maybe it's a good thing, or maybe it's a bad thing that, all the billionaires have their favorite LLMs, right? And so they can train them to, espouse their points of view, I guess, or whatever. Maybe these leaks are, publicity stunts, right? It's like, hey, my model is so powerful, it can do this, it can do that, right? Maybe these publicity stunts, will come back to, to bite them in the rear. I just know what, I don't have any inside information. I just know what I read and what I see, and as we've already said, it's changing very rapidly. There's a lot at stake for these companies. They've tried lots of different techniques for guardrails. Almost always somebody that's very determined or very clever can figure out a way to get around them. That's why I was trying to be fairly heavy-handed and say, put a little constrained LLM here to do these interfaces with humans, right? But don't give it enough authority. Yeah. Don't even give it the ability to write any information into any place, right? Just return a result to the deterministic code. Almost, try very hard to return structured results, because if it's hallucinating really badly or on the edge, then it won't even give you a valid result, which you can test syntactically rather than semantically, which would some people have tried use hey, feed this result from model A into model B and have it critique it. Well,
yeah, right.
It's great if your business is selling tokens, I suppose, right? But
so
may not be the most elegant solution.
Yeah, Carlos, Alan, do you guys see an uptick in interest in sort of hybrid approaches, or are you still, people still wildly optimistic about what's your sense?
Well, it's the other way around for us, of course, because we're traditionally a good old-fashioned AI company, and we're just introducing agents. So the uptick is in the interest in agents, and
for sure.
I think these troublesome events, publicity stunts or not, actually reinforce that viewpoint of responsible use of AI on a secure platform.
Right. Carlos, are you seeing anything?
Well, what we see is concern, but it hasn't dramatically changed it. I mean, the companies that are concerned about their information going to the AI and leaking out or being attacked essentially are heavily investing in their own framework. So it's now fairly typical that they don't actually, first they dissociate from the actual LLM, so they can call any as they want.
Right.
It's all authenticated, no single key for the company or for the group. So it's all per person, and it's all logged essentially,
Right.
and it's logged at the
Right.
company level, not at the AI company level, if you want. And it can be turned off and off. All they do their own pre-processing. So, for example, one of our customers, whenever any user goes and makes starts a chat or has a discussion with an LLM, they have other models that go there and that look at the interaction and say, well, this is not going the right way. I don't want this. This is going to leak. So I'm going to stop it. So I do see, and this is, heavy investment. However, it's not heavy investment that was budgeted for. So we do see our other customers that basically say, no AI now, essentially. And if you do AI from home, you're liable if ever you upload a document from the company. So there is that, that big concern. And there is the whole issue of legal compliance that for many of the customers makes it it's sort of a break in progress, if you want. Some of our customers even ask us to sign a document that says no AI was used in the creation of X, which it's going to be a problem because it's so damn good at generating code. So
for sure, right? I mean, I think this is a real issue, right? It's just like we certainly see, like as you do, right, that people who've seen some of these stories and everything else who are just like, well, that's it, we're not using it at all. I think I probably see more who are like, we're willing to, like Gary's point, to let programmers use it and IT people use it, and for people whose job it is to summarize documents, to help them summarize a document, that kind of stuff. But we don't want it talking directly to customers. Right, we still want it to go through one of our employees so that the employee can be taught and given guidance and boundaries and signed documents and everything else, because we want to have someone to blame, essentially, right? We want some framework here that matches our legacy legal framework. And I think they're still struggling to think through what a future legal framework might look to if they had AI doing more of this.
I mean, they put in place all these limitations, but we also see them using, the AI-based summarization of all the meetings.
Exactly.
So where
AI
even more
appendix
information
to the MSA.
Exactly.
Right? Yes,
So it's sort of. I think we're in the early days of understanding what the danger is and how to protect ourselves. I mean, there was a very good few calls that for those of you who are interested in security at DEF CON this year, where they had a capture the flag event where they had to define what the role of AI was going to be in there. Quite interesting debates. I mean, for those interested.
All right, so I think we have time for a couple more questions. I'm going to ask one of Paul's, and then I've got my wrap-up question that is basically like one of Paul's. So, so this is where we're going to take that question that Alan saw earlier, right? So, as we get better at generating code, right? And in theory, you can say, here's a decision model, generate code for me, make sure it logs how the decision is made, make sure it's transparent, yada, yada, yada. You can generate all this code. Do we think people are going to do that? Yeah. Or do we think people will continue to use decision engines and decision platforms so they don't have to generate and maintain all that code? So what's your sort of best guess? Is this ability, particularly if we work from formal models like DMN, going to start replacing decision engines? Is the value going to be in building the right DMN model, or do we still see execution management being something that people will happily pay for? I'll ask Gary first because he doesn't have a decision engine in the market, and then Carlos and Alan, who obviously do have, right? So, Gary, what's your thought?
I think Python is friendly enough, good enough, and more to the point, all of the frontier models are pre-trained on Python, and So I think as a previous speaker was saying, it's very expensive to try to fine tune or to, teach the LLMs, a kind of a less popular formalism, right? Because, you either have to sort of teach them the entire, DMN or whatever it is, on every interaction, right? Which is
No,
incredibly
they
expensive.
stole one of my books, so they already know how DMN works. Seriously, I got paid by I'm going to get paid by Anthropic because they stole one of my.
Oh, that's good.
Alan
That's
probably
good.
is too. So
Yeah. And so and of course I think maybe the OMG specs are out there and they can hoover those up as well. But nevertheless, that's a good question, right? You can ask an LLM to take maybe a textual set of rules or a decision model expressed as an Excel spreadsheet, and it can turn that into code, and it can pretty much do the other way around, and show it to you. It's not going to be formal in the sense that it's an execution sort of language or has execution semantics, but it's going to mean a lot probably to business analysts still, right? To see, to communicate in terms of spreadsheets. And then under the covers, do you really care? Do you really care what it is, right? And do you really and do you really want to see, whatever your textual language is? You may not want to see that. You may just, I think I said earlier, I used to look at the code that the AI wrote, and now I don't. And if I have a question about it, I'll just ask the AI. Hey, didn't we write some code that does this and that? What? Tell me about that, or where is it? Can you pop it up on the screen and show me the relevant snippet? Things of that nature, right? So I suspect that we don't need as many formal systems and DSLs as we did before LLMs. Yeah.
But you, Carlos?
Well, it's an interesting question. The reality, though, is that most decision management solutions have a very small space for engines. Sorry to say that bluntly, but practically all of them do code generation. Practically all of them have Java or .NET Core under the covers, or Python under the covers. So at the end of the day, they are a better way of organizing and presenting code around decisioning. And that's the part that you lose when you go straight from language to coding. So you can ask it, I want some visibility and some traceability, but the value of what the platforms do provide is that they've already faced 20 years of questions around that. They know what needs to be presented and how it needs to be presented and that kind of stuff, which you don't necessarily know as you're actually injecting as you're asking the system to build you a solution for a point solution. And then there's a question we use. So I do think that engines by themselves, as in a RITI engine, which I think was the second question that he had, have been a very small part of decision management platforms for a very long time now. And that the value of the decision management platform is in all the rest, all the management.
It's the management platform.
It's the management, the visibility, the what if type of stuff, etc., which is normalized, which is the same across all decisions. So here, if you have more than one decision, we need to tell the system generated exactly the same way, etc. And the debuggability of it. It's much easier to debug an environment that gives you support for that as an analyst than it is to debug Python code, which is not typed or maybe typed, or debugging Java or .NET code.
Where are you, Alan? Where do you stand on this?
Carlos has basically said everything I was going to say, that a decision engine is far more than execution, and it's all the visualization and analysis and simulation facilities that make it a useful environment. And I think what's going to happen is the decision platform is just going to move up a layer and be concerned purely with the logical model rather than the physical model.
Yeah, I think a whole bunch of us here have been beating on people to stop calling it a business rule engine or a BRE and call it a BRMS, business rules management system, or decision management platform, right? And I think the management piece is where the value proposition is. I think if you only got one decision or a small number of decisions or very localized decision making, I think the value proposition's always been a bit of a stretch. But for corporations that really need to manage a significant number of decisions, it's the platform for managing them. That's always been the value proposition. Well, not always, but the last decade or so, for sure, has been the value proposition. So I think it stands. All right, so we got a few minutes left. So this is sort of the quick question round. So there's a lot of talk about AI, a lot of talk about large language models, and a lot of talk about decision models. So I'm going to ask a combination of my question and Paul's question. So with a particular reference to AI, what would you like to see in a future decision modeling standard, like this DMN 2.0, or some future decision modeling approach that was a formal model for decisioning? What would you like to see it add to better include or to provide an AI sort of focus to it? And I'll start with Alan, because he's on the current committee, then we'll do Gary, and then we'll do Carlos to give him the last word. Alan,
okay,
what would you do?
Two things. One, fairly simple. I would like to be able to say that this decision should be made for every instance of an object in this class. So I want this set of decisions to be made for every applicant and so on. I'd like that to be clearly visualizable in a TRD. That's a fairly trivial one. The big thing I want to add is support for metacognition, something beyond our link to business motivation model. I want to be able to add business outcome elements to DRDs.
Outcome and intent, right?
Yeah. Right. So I want to see information requirements from on those outcomes from the decisions and other outcomes that affect them. And I'd like to be able to specify the owners of those areas, be able to specify business intent as targets for those outcomes, in other words, turning them into KPIs. I'd like users to be able to assert causal influences between decisions and outcomes, and between outcomes that actually are not dependencies, but are just effect of the environment.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think that's sort of the sense of being able to specify what I think the business should mean and how that should connect these things. Yes. Not part of the formal model, but so we can judge how well the model is reflecting that sort of sense. All right, Gary, what about you? I know you're not on the committee anymore, so you can give us something really hard to do. So,
well, I mean, maybe something. It's a new major version, right? So I'm probably a couple of dots behind on the 1.x series. I guess you need to earn your major number by doing something hard. But off the top of my head, well, one thing, I mean, just because maybe we do need a symbol or something to represent a generative model or an LLM, in the DRD, especially if you're going to try to interface with it explicitly, maybe there needs to be some explicit, symbol for it, send this to the LLM, get the output out, something like a predictive model or something, or an analytic model. I think we had before, which some people used more than others, I guess.
And nothing else that would demonstrate that you could integrate AI into decision models, which I think would be an important, flag, right?
Right.
The wave,
And then maybe maybe the DMN, decision execution should generate some standard, trace or standard, decision receipt. Maybe you call it that, right? Where it says, I made this decision, these were the inputs I used. These were the rules and the versions, and used at the time. These were the objections. This is how they were overruled, that kind of thing, and that, might address partly Alan's problem of, or his point that it's more than just a verbalization of a trace, an explanation. You need to be able to, to ask questions. Well, if the trace is data and the LLM understands it, you can certainly engage in Q&A about it. The question is, does it have a rich enough model, that you're talking about, so that it can answer your questions? And so I think that would be maybe something to look at, a standard kind of, trace/decision receipt.
Yeah. All right, Carlos, what about you?
Well, Gary stole my thunder. That's exactly I'm less involved with DMN as all of you gentlemen, as you know. So we do use DMN. We don't use feel because we have our own syntax. So overall, we feel like a second-class citizen in the DM world, not being feel compliant, which shouldn't be the case, but that's the reality. I do think that the point that Gary made is very important. It has been something that has been mentioned by customers, essentially. So,
all right. So we'd like to have some way of expressing intent and how those intents and outcomes are related in a sort of metacognition kind of way. We'd like to have some kind of formalism of the decision receipt, the decision log, so we can see how it decided and what that means. And we'd like to have some way of more formally integrating AI into it. I think those are all great things. Well, Alan and I will add them to the list, as they say. So I'd like to thank the panelists. And I want to say that I think there was some confusion over the dates. So I think the people we missed, didn't just, they were confused as to the date. So I want to give them a pass. If you have questions, I'm sure you can put them in the chat. Jacob will make sure we get them answered later. Yeah. And then there is a question in there about where do people go to find good information about AI and AI developments. And so if you have any thoughts, I think you could put them in the chat and all help each other with I found these places to be great places to get AI. And with that, I'll hand you back to Jacob. Jacob, back to you.
Yes, thank you to all our experts. And it was a good panel as usual. And this is the end of our second day, and see you all tomorrow.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Well, bye.
Yeah,
bye.
A couple more hours before my beer. On the west